this very odd opinion that was just expressed in the Washington Post. I don't know that I'd say dishonest exactly, because that suggests it's intentional, and I don't know what was going on here. But I think we have a graphic of, there we go. That's the article, The Danger of Critical Race Theory. You already know it's going to be good.
That's for sure.
So then this is how it starts. All right. By now, most Americans have heard of critical race theory, but many do not know just how radical or pernicious CRT is, because, as a new study from the American Enterprise Institute shows, the media does not explain its key tenets in its coverage. Now that, so far, so good. I mean, I think this much is true. Like, it is objectively true that most people do not know what the key tenets of critical race theory are.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, do most people who comment on critical theory know very much about what critical theory is about either? It's become a placeholder for pretty much everything, from Marxism to a bunch of annoying students who demand extra foam on their Starbucks coffees, right?
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, especially, yeah. I mean, critical, like the whole critical theory Frankfurt School thing, which I actually got my younger brother. I gave him a copy of, I don't know if you've read that book, Grand Hotel Abyss from Verso, but it's anyway, it's a fun book about the Frankfurt School. So I gave that to him for his birthday. We were talking about it, when we're Skyping last week, and he was just talking about how amazing it is that Frankfurt School has this role in all these people's imaginations as the like font of all evil, and this sort of like conspiracy of revolutionary communists, like doing this like 300 stage plan, to bring down American civilization. It's like, you actually read about these guys, I mean, man, other than Marcuse, who's at least like hooked up to the new left, like these were the most like dismal defeatists, like ever came out of, although came out of is the operative term, the Marxist tradition. It's like, yeah, I mean, Adorno wasn't like planning out, like, here's my plan to bring about communist revolution in America. He was like, writing grim screeds about, how like, fascism was inevitable in our psychology, and, jazz music is like, bad because people like it too much.
I know, and the Beatles are a sign that Western civilization has collapsed. I mean, one of the beautiful things about reading a lot of right-wing media, as I do, and I know you do as well, is it's really empowering if you're a kind of a leftist intellectual, because you feel like, God, I really have my arm on the lever of history, right? And single-handedly, my books on critical theory that I thought just a few dozen people were going to read and commentary on are actually going to just move society in oh so many directions. And then I go back to the real world, and I'm like, oh, I can't even get my students to actually bother doing their readings on an everyday basis, because even if I'm marking them. So it's very empowering and nice that way.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I asked one of our nation's preeminent historians, Princeton University's Alan Guelzo, to explain CRT and why it is so dangerous. Keep that in mind when you hear what comes next, that this is one of our country's preeminent historians. I don't know if Canada has historians this good. Critical race theory, Guelzo says, is a subset of critical theory. Already kind of wrong, but whatever. It gets so much wronger by the end of the sentence. That began with Immanuel Kant in the 1790s. What? And it gets better.
That was just, I mean, at that point, I looked at that statement and I was just like, I had no idea that when I was reading the Critique of Pure Reason, it was really the critique of woke reason. And I was being indoctrinated with that. And indeed, everyone's been indoctrinated with it since the 18th century. But man, oh man.
Yeah. It was a response to and rejection of. All right, sorry, got to roll back that part of the tape. It was a response to and rejection of the principles of the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason on which the American Republic was founded. Kant believed that, quote, reason was inadequate to give shape to our lives, unquote. And so he set about, quote, developing a theory of being critical of reason, Guelzo says. Yeah, I remember, so when we were like getting together the graphics for this, our graphic designer, Jandra World, like said like, oh, this is sloppy. It says Guelzo says twice in that paragraph, but I'm actually kind of glad that they included it the second time, because I would not want anyone to think these were quotes from Kant.
Well, don't you remember in undergrad philosophy, Ben, when they told you, Kant is an enemy of reason. He continuously insists that you should just do whatever you want and let emotion rule your life. And really, you're not under a duty towards anyone except the quivering masses who need to be compelled to overthrow the rich. It's Kantianism 101.
Yeah. But the critique of reason ended up justifying, quote, ways of appealing to some very unreasonable things as explanations. Things like race, nationality, class, he says. Critical theory helped spawn totalitarian ideologies in the 20th century, such as Marxism and Nazism.
Yeah.
Wow. Which taught us that,
well, I mean, hey, listen, Adolf Eichmann used to say he always acted in such a way that he could will whatever the Fuhrer willed in his own action. So I guess we'll just take his word on it, right?
Yeah, which is actually kind of fun as an example, because Eichmann's defense that he was just a cog in the machine is sort of the opposite of that. But let's see, which taught that all human relationships are relations of power between an oppressor class and an oppressed class. Yeah, I mean, that's bad enough as a description of Marxism. That's bizarre as a description of Nazism.
I know it's also really odd that he seems to be conflating all of these things together. So really, the argument that whites have been oppressing people for a long time is analogous to the argument by Nazis that Jews are oppressing them. And it's also analogous to the argument of Marxists that the bourgeoisie or the capitalists are oppressing. So really, any kind of argument about oppression whatsoever is just tantamount to Nazism, or at least flirting in the same family of discourses.
Yeah, for the Marxists, goes on, the bourgeoisie were the oppressors. For the Nazis, the Jews were the oppressors. And today, in the 21st century America, critical race theory teaches that whites are the oppressors. So,
yeah.
Okay. CRT, all white people instinctively white supremacists, Guelzo says, added, I say instinctively because this is not a function of reason. It's a weird, anyway, whatever. The idea that that's like a exhaustive list of human motivations, that you're either using your reason or you're acting on instincts, is fairly strange, right? Like, I mean, if nothing else, like culture exists, whatever.
Oh, I don't know if it's that strange. And I mean, we're going to get into this, but I'm starting to get a sense from the flavor of this that this is a guy who's overdosed on an awful lot of Ayn Rand, because it's got her fingerprints all over it.
This is why its advocates talk about systemic racism, a CRT term that has crept into our public discourse and has even been embraced by President Biden. Systemic sounds like systematic, except of course it isn't. Guelzo's whatever says when you try to find some systematic, then you have to go find evidence. But systemic implies something so deep and instinctive that you're not even conscious of it. There's instinctive bias that's built into people of certain colors. CRT rejects democracy as a relic of Enlightenment reason, Guelzo says, and argues that white people use tricks like democracy and the search for truth to exploit and dominate people of color. Okay, we've got the rest of this, but I think we could just let that stand for the whole thing. So, yeah, as you point out, right, Marxism, Nazism, critical race theory, etc.
Probably start throwing Jesus and Moses and anybody else who opposed oppression in there as well, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? Because this is just the Jordan Peterson thesis that postmodernism, by which he really means like green-haired college kids yelling about pronouns, which is actually a phenomenon that has little to nothing to do with postmodernism, but whatever. But what he means by postmodernism is the same thing as Marxism, because well, various groups, white people, men, cis people, straight people, are like the capitalists oppressing workers and the views as groups, which means that anybody who's ever talked about oppression, right? The authors of the Torah, the Book of Exodus, everybody in the French Revolution, like Marxism predates Marx by all of human history, according
to the democratic socialists in Germany who said they were being oppressed were like the Nazis, everyone. We just get completely circular with this.
No, yeah, exactly. So, but this is actually even worse than the Jordan Peterson thesis, because at least he had the decency to not try to lump the Nazis in with this, which is just fucking amazing. So,
and I mean, at least Jordan Peterson has some respect for the Western canon, as long as it doesn't go too extreme. So, I can't recall any point where he decided to drag poor old Kant's reputation into our endless culture war debates.
Right. And presumably he wouldn't, because I think even Jordan Peterson, honestly, is probably enough of a great books guy that he probably knows a little bit about what Kant thought.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so, like, he might, like at the very least know that that not only was Kant not rejected Enlightenment reason, Kant was one of the central figures of the Enlightenment. That Kant is the guy who wrote the manifesto for the Enlightenment, like literally.
Yeah, I mean, he was probably, I don't normally say this about Kant because articulation wasn't a strong point, but the most articulate propagandist and polemicist for the Enlightenment in that essay.
No, exactly. Like
so much so that people to this day still criticize him for being almost too pro-Enlightenment, for emphasizing reason at the expense of so much else.
Yeah, that is the usual criticism of Kant. That he's like that. He doesn't want to talk about anything other than reason, but there are all these other things that are important, and and he has this sort of dogmatic Enlightenment, like view that that misses all the stuff about the human experience. And yeah, I mean, Kant is usually not the clearest writer. I always like, there's a line in The Groundwork of the Metaphysics of Morals. I used to quote this on syllabi, where he said that basically he's justifying his writing style. He says, look, I could try to, slight paraphrase, right? I could try to dumb this down for you, but I'm not going to do that. Other people later maybe can, popularize this, but, I want to give you real philosophy, not this is an exact quote. This part is an exact quote. Idle coffeehouse chatter. That's his defense, and he's sticking to it. But like in that essay on the Enlightenment, he's actually very clear and lucid, and it's like talking about how enlightenment means that you don't basically subcontract your conscience to priests, and you don't let authorities do your thinking for you, and it's all this celebration of that, right? Like, so.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I should say my favorite quote from him to that effect is actually in the Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics. Titles usually weren't his strong suit, where he bitches about the 1981 version of the Critique of Pure Reason. And he says, I knew this was a tough book and I was going to get a lot of complaints from everyday people. But when I got complaints from other academics who one should expect, would be willing to deal with the difficult work, I got really frustrated. Because, you should have all just, grinned and dealt with it like I had to when writing the thing. So here's it for you, a little bit dumbed down. Don't ask me for this again, basically. It's like the most cantankerous thing that he ever wrote. And, part of me was like, yeah, it's a great book and everyone should go read through it if they're interested in the history of philosophy. On the other hand, anyone who has gone through the book has at least spent a few moments wanting to throw it against the wall, being like, I just can't do it anymore, right? Like, I'm never going to get through this thing.
Yeah,
so
for
you
sure.
Think to yourself, he maybe have had a little bit more sympathy for his readers down through the centuries who have had to crack that nut.
Yeah, and honestly, people who, I mean, again, the funniest thing about this is people who really do have, I mean, nobody has quite the views that are attributed critical race theorists in this essay, because it's like a silly caricature, but like the people who are the closest to having the views that are being described in this essay don't tend to be big Kant fans for exactly this reason, like people who are really
Oh, yeah.
into standpoint epistemology and, stuff like that, you like, sort of deferring to oppressed groups and not thinking that you can, reason in a universalistic way about everybody and whatever. Like, like Kantian liberalism is often the way they'll label, right, the thing that they don't like. You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.